be back with you again this evening. It's great to have so many visitors here from as far away as Missouri, and some that we don't get to see very often are here. Great to see each one, and certainly glad to see a good number of the students this evening. Thank you for the great supper this evening. Billy and Crystal provided it. I know Miss Carol helped. I'm assuming that the girls helped as well. Very grateful for the very good meal and for all who helped to make that possible. Enjoyed the food and the fellowship. Perfect song to have before we have our lesson this evening. One of the few songs, probably the only song in the songbook that mentions dragons. If you can find one that has dinosaurs, we'll really be in business. But that was an excellent choice, and the singing so good tonight as it has been thus far through the course of the week. We are talking about dinos and dragons tonight. So we're going to be in Job 40 and 41. Dinosaurs and dragons. Our children are taught a number of things in their schools if they're not homeschooled. And even if they're homeschooled, some of their material may deal with some of these things from the error perspective and present it as if it were truth. I remember that Maggie used the Kingfisher, I think it was, encyclopedia, and it had evolution taught in it. So even some of the homeschool material can have these things being taught. But our children are taught these things in their schools. Our children are taught these things in their media that they watch, either television or things which are online. Our children are taught this just day by day as they see commercials or as they're in store and they're looking at toys, in the store and they're looking at toys and they see something about millions of years. Our children are taught that the universe and the earth are very old. The universe 13.8 billion years old. The earth 4.5 or 4.6 billions of years old. Wasn't too long ago, it was only 3 billion years old. It is aging at an astronomical rate. The earth gets older a lot more quickly than we do, that's for sure. They're also taught that there is no God. They are taught that men are the products of evolution, that men are millions of years removed from the dinosaurs, and that dragons are mythical fancies. Now, we would expect that from some sources. On the left are a couple of books, Our Family Tree, An Evolution Story, and Grandmother Fish, a child's first book of evolution. A couple of books that I would not recommend. I have them in my library, but Mason's not going to see them. On the right are some books that maybe you wouldn't expect. Perhaps your children enjoyed the Magic Tree House books. I know that Maggie enjoyed reading those. But Dinosaurs Before Dark talks about millions of years. Oh, Say, Can You Say Dinosaurs talks about millions of years. And one of the books that I loved when I was a child, Danny and the Dinosaur, you wouldn't think it because it's 50, 60 years old. I don't remember exactly when it was written. But twice in that book it talks about millions of years. So it's not just the propaganda that they receive in the education system or the propaganda that they see on television or elsewhere. It's even in things that we might have considered innocuous, not necessarily paying attention to the words when we bought the books. What we did when Maggie was little, and of course when Connor came along, he had the same books to work with. We took whiteout markers and we whited out where it had millions of years and just replaced that with thousands of years. And that worked out very conveniently. I didn't even have to write too much like a font that was in there. They just, must have been in there. I don't know. But that's something that we can do to help to stem the exposure that they have. Our children need to know that Genesis 1 through 11 is genuine history. We don't have time to talk a lot about the early part of the book of Genesis, but one of the areas which is the focus of attack is Genesis 1 through 11, because that's really the foundation for Scripture. You have there the creation, You have there the first messianic promise. You have the flood. You have the Table of Nations. You have the Tower of Babel. And if they can attack those things and make those things myth, or appear to be as if they were myth, they can hammer at the foundations of Christianity, of theism, of the home, of morality. So our children need to know that Genesis 1 through 11 is a genuine history. And I say is because really those chapters should all be taken as a unit. Our children need to know that there is one God. Many will say the God of the Israelites was a development from the polytheism of Mesopotamia. Well, before you can have two of something, you have to have had one of something. You don't move from polytheism to monotheism. You move from monotheism to polytheism. The historians get that backward. Our children need to know that God is the author of all the creation. Our children need to know that men are created in the image of God. Our children need to know the things that we're going to be concerned with this evening, that dinosaurs and man co-inhabited the earth, and that dragons are as historical as dinosaurs. And that may sound a little odd, but it's true. It is verified historically. We'll talk about how that's the case. But I would make every assurance that dragons are just as real as dinosaurs. Now that's going to be the real area of our focus tonight. We're going to spend most time on dinosaur and man co-inhabiting the earth, and dragons we'll deal with as we have opportunity toward the end. Before we go any further, I do want to lay one more thing down in introduction, and that is a lot of what our children are being taught that we noticed on that first slide is called science. But science is poorly defined in 2025. Science has moved from the realm of the scientific method. There are many scientists who say that the scientific method is outmoded. Science has moved from the necessity of being tested in the laboratory and repeatable and things of that nature. We are considering from a biblical perspective what is true science. Because true science, that which is testable, that which is falsifiable, that which is repeatable, true science has never once made a claim against God, His Word, or the historicity of Jesus, or anything else along that line. We have to change the definitions of science to be able to attack that foundation. Anyway, we can talk more about that. If anybody has any specific questions on that, I can point you to some good material at the very least. We're going to notice Job's contribution this evening to the discussion of dinosaurs and dragons, and I apologize for the small print. I have 20 some odd slides, and if it weren't this small, it would be 120 some odd slides, and quite frankly, I'm too lazy for that. So 20 some odd it is. I'm not going to feel bad if you need to move down front. If you need to move down front where you can see them, I'll read a lot of it, but you might take a picture of it with your phone if you're interested in having this information. Chapters 40 and 41 introduce the behemoth, chapter 40, verses 15 through 24, and Leviathan, chapter 41. These creatures are introduced to demonstrate the ability of God. Now, that's an important concept because the challengers to the historicity of chapter 40 and 41 of Job, or the challengers to these being dragons or dinosaurs in 40 and dragons in 41, either say, no, those are just regular old animals like we have today, hippopotamus, elephant, crocodile, wild ox, or so forth, or that the images are symbolic. In fact, even Homer Haley, and I had a lot of respect for Homer Haley and other of his writings. I think he has some great commentaries, but he completely missed it. He could not miss it any worse when he was talking about Leviathan. Because he said the description, especially around chapter 41, verse 17, verse 18, was highly poetical and figurative. No, not highly poetical and figurative, and we'll notice two reasons why that's the case. But let's remember what we noticed at the top of that screen, that these chapters are written to demonstrate the ability of God. And we're not going to go into detail on this, but when Job speaks again at the end of chapter, or at the beginning of chapter 42, he's going to say, "Now I see." In other words, you had already spoken to me from chapter 38 and 39, and I realized I needed to put my hand over my mouth. But now, after you've talked about the behemoth and Leviathan, the greatest being the Leviathan, I have to be silent. And I've recognized that I was speaking out of my ignorance. Now I know. Well, if he just showed him another run-of-the-mill alligator or crocodile, or if he just showed another run-of-the-mill elephant. Now, I'm not against elephants, except when my team has to play against Alabama, and then, those elephants get the better of us usually anyway, so it doesn't matter whether I like them or not. When you've seen an elephant, you've seen an elephant. Okay, we go to the zoo, we see elephants. We go to the next zoo, we see elephants. Elephants are cool, but I know what an elephant looks like. I know how big an elephant is. No, this is something more special. And that's, again, not to take away from elephants. I'm not going to tell one to his face that I'm not impressed, but, in reality, both statement and reason show the historicity of these creatures. Look at chapter 41, verse 12. Who is speaking in chapter 41, verse 12? God is speaking. God not only is inspiring whoever wrote the book to write the book, but he is inspiring him to record the words that God himself said. God himself is describing the creatures of chapter 40 and 41, and he says, "I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion." Basically, God is saying there, I am going to describe him exactly as he is. I'm not going to use any figurative language. I'm not going to use hyperbole. What he is, I'm going to set forth. Second, along this line, in the statement and reason, one does not brag about his ability to actually create and control something which is imaginary. Okay? I didn't have imaginary playmates. My brother did. Dad was a preacher, so we couldn't afford ones for me. I had to have his hand-me-downs. But I had his hand-me-down imaginary playmates. Now, those imaginary playmates, Andy never really bragged about them, about being the one who could control them. In fact, Andy, as he got older, he sort of wished Dad would stop using them as illustrations. And little did he know that I'd be using them as an illustration tonight. But he's all right. He's down in Florida, so he'll be okay. Those imaginary playmates, so what? You can push them around. You can tell them what to do. Is that a great achievement? No. If these are not exactly as they are described, God is bragging about just his imagination. Is God greater than man because he has a better imagination than man? Or is God greater than man because he had the creative ability to create everything which we see in our universe, from the grandest scales of the constellations to the smallest literal cells in our bodies? He has that ability to create, and this he describes as the chief of his creation. He's not going to brag about an imagination. He's going to explain to Job, I created this creature and I can control him. The mention of these creatures to Job would be meaningless also had Job either not witnessed them or were not aware of those who witnessed them. These have to be real creatures whom Job has either experienced himself or he has heard of others experiencing. All right, we're going to look first at Behemoth, Job 40, verses 15 through 24. Time will not allow us to read all of this text. I would encourage you to go home and to read these because it's amazing seeing the description and comparing them to what we think of when we think of dinosaurs. In fact, what I've done sometimes in young people's classes is I've asked them to get a sheet of paper and I've read the descriptions and asked them to draw as I was reading the descriptions. Okay, he has a tail that's like a cedar. Well, how's a child going to draw that? A child's probably going to draw a tail that looks like a tree sticking out of the back of the thing. He's not a little hippopotamus tail just bouncing around like this. So I asked the child to draw this description. But we start in verse 15 with, he eateth grass as an ox. Okay, this is an herbivore. This is a creature which can eat down by the mire, or he can go up into the hills, and he can eat. He moveth his tail like a cedar. Again, that's an impressive tail. That's not the little tail that a hippopotamus has, or the tail that a rhinoceros has, or the tail that an elephant has. This is like the cedars of Lebanon. This is like the tree that was used to construct the temple of God. He moves his tail like this majestic tree. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron, verse 18. In other words, he is extremely strongly constructed. I really love the picture of verse 23. He drinketh up a river, can draw up Jordan, or draw up a Jordan, a river like the River Jordan, although Jordan probably wasn't intended there. He can draw up a river, a Jordan, into his mouth, verse 23. Liking history and studying Herodotus and his description of things, saw a very similar picture. And that picture was describing the army of Xerxes. Okay, Xerxes is the Greek name for Esther's husband, Ahasuerus, that we read about in Esther 1:1. Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, had an army. Herodotus described the army as being 5 million men. It probably wasn't 5 million men. No historian says it possibly even could have been that large. Let's say that it's a tenth of that. 500,000 men. I'm not good at math. 50,000 men, if my editing is correct. 50,000 men is relatively reasonable. I think even a little bit higher than that would be perfectly fine. And if you have a tenth of the population in the army, you could actually justify 5 million. 5 million. That could be a tenth. 50 million was the size of the population estimated during Xerxes' time. Regardless, he's got a massive army. Herodotus also described that army as being able to drink up rivers. What river did they not drink dry? How many other times have you seen that description of something? I've seen it twice. Once is with reference to an army. The other time is with reference to this creature. This must be an amazing, amazing creature. And, judging by the description that we see, he must have been a dinosaur. Let's read some different secular accounts. And again, I'm sorry about the size of these. The passages are actually written large enough. You should be able to see those pretty well, the references. And what you can do is just type that reference in. The internet's going to pop that exact passage up. So you'll be able to trace every one of these if you so desire. All right, Herodotus was talking about Egypt and specifically the relationship or the area between Arabia and Egypt. And he was describing the defending of Egypt that the birds called ibises would do. What were they defending against? They were defending against, in Herodotus' words, flying serpents. Okay, we don't have a lot of flying serpents around today. But Herodotus said that in his day they did. He said there's a region moreover in Arabia, situated nearly over against the city of Buto, to which place I came to inquire about the winged serpents. Herodotus is from Greece. He has made a trek all the way through Asia Minor, all the way down through the Levant, down into Egypt, so that he can find out more about these. When I came thither, I saw bones of serpents and spines in quantity so great that it is impossible to make report of the number. And there were heaps of spines, some heaps large, others less large, and others smaller still than these. And these heaps were many in number. This region in which the spines are scattered upon the ground is of the nature of an entrance from a narrow mountain pass to a great plain, which plain adjoins the plain of Egypt. And the story goes that at the beginning of spring, winged serpents from Arabia fly toward Egypt, and the birds called ibises meet them at the entrance to this country, and do not suffer the serpents to go by, but kill them. The outward form of the ibis is this. He goes on to describe the ibis, and then he said, this is the appearance of the black kind which fight with the serpents, but of those which most crowd around men's feet, for there are two kinds of ibises, the head is bare, ... Then he speaks about, as for the serpent down toward the bottom, its form is like that of the water snake, and it has wings not feathered, but most nearly resembling the wings of the bat. Let so much suffice as has been said now concerning sacred animals. So he says they're flying serpents. So what? Herodotus, people don't put a lot of stock in Herodotus in many areas, so maybe we shouldn't pay too much attention to him. He has another mention of them in Book 3, Section 107. But let's move ahead, and let's notice Josephus. We've probably all heard about Josephus. Josephus is the one who recorded so much of Old Testament history, and even he talks about these animals and says Moses encountered them. Moses prevented the enemies, took and led his army before these enemies were apprised of his attacking them, did not march by the river, but by land, where he gave a wonderful demonstration of his sagacity, of his wisdom. For when the ground was difficult to be passed over because the multitude of serpents, which it produces in vast numbers, and indeed is singular in some of those productions which other countries do not breed, and yet such as are worse than others in power and mischief and an unusual fierceness of sight, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen and also fly in the air, and so come upon men at unawares and do them a mischief, Moses invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve the army safe and without hurt. So he describes how Moses dealt with the same flying creatures, flying serpents that Herodotus had described. Look at the difference in date. Herodotus is writing in the 400s BC. Josephus is writing at the end of the 1st century AD. Probably not sharing the same sources. Marcus Tullius Cicero wrote the same thing, and he did so between Herodotus and Josephus, closer to Josephus' time. The Egyptians, so much ridiculed, held no beast to be sacred except on account of some advantage which they had received from them. The ibis, a very large bird with strong legs and a horny long beak, destroys a great number of serpents. These birds keep Egypt from pestilent diseases by killing and devouring the flying serpents brought from the deserts of Libya by the southwest wind, which prevents the mischief that may attend their biting while alive or any infection while dead. I could speak of the advantage of the ichneumon, the crocodile and the cat, but I'm unwilling to be tedious. That ichneumon that he mentions, that's another one of these amazing creatures. And this is Ammianus Marcellius. He said, among Egyptian birds, the variety of which is countless, the ibis is sacred, harmless, and beloved for the reason that by carrying the eggs of serpents to its nestlings for food, it destroys and makes fewer those destructive pests. These same birds meet the winged armies of snakes, which issue from the marshes of Arabia, producing deadly poisons, and before they leave their own lands, vanquish them in battles in the air and devour them. When is he writing? He's writing 200 plus years after Josephus is writing. So you have 700 to 800 years where flying serpents are being recorded by the historians. Now, I'm not saying that the behemoth is a flying serpent. But what I am saying is that we have secular record of amazing creatures of a reptilian kind or serpentine kind, which are unlike what we have in our world today. Now, we go further, and Pliny the Elder is going to not talk about the ibises, but he's going to talk about the head of the Nile. I already mentioned the arguments by which this opinion is supported. Near the fountain there is found a wild beast, which is called the Catoblepas, an animal of moderate size and in other respects sluggish in the movement of the rest of its limbs. Its head is remarkably heavy, and it only carries it with the greatest difficulty, being always bent down towards the earth. Were it not for this circumstance, it would prove the destruction of the human race, for all who behold its eyes fall dead upon the spot. Probably some sort of dinosaur-like creature, heavy head, droops down, difficulty carrying it. Think about how the world would have changed after the flood. Before the flood, you have a lot more air pressure, which means you can support a larger type of animal than you can after the flood. But that's Pliny the Elder. He said also regarding the ichneumon that we mentioned earlier, the hostility is the especial glory of this animal, which is also produced in Egypt. It plunges itself repeatedly in the mud and then dries itself in the sun. As soon as by these means it has armed itself with a sufficient number of coatings, it proceeds to the combat, raising its tail and turning its back to the serpent. It receives its stings, which are inflicted to no purpose, until at last, turning its head sideways and viewing its enemy, it seizes it by the throat. Not content, however, with this victory, it conquers another creature also, which is no less dangerous. So there are great creatures inhabiting the world of the years BC into the first few centuries AD. Claudius Aelianus talks about Alexander the Great, and we won't spend time here, but Alexander the Great, his army fought a serpent, which is described toward the end of that text as 70 cubits in length, or perhaps height. It doesn't say length or height. I'm assuming length because he's sticking his head out of the cave. 70 cubits, if you're dealing with a cubit that's 1.5 feet, this thing is 105 feet long. Okay, that's a big outfit. We have those descriptions, but we also have historical demonstrations. Rock drawings, stone carvings, figurines, some from the Havasupai Canyon in Arizona, some the Kachina Bridge in Utah, Acambara, Mexico, Taprom, Cambodia, Ica, Peru. We also can look at the coelacanths. We don't have time to go into these in great detail. But on the top left there, you see the coelacanth. This is what's called a living fossil. It originally was thought to have existed and gone extinct 65 million years ago. And then our fishermen began catching them and catching them and catching them. They've been caught off the coast of Asia. They've been caught off the coast of Africa, probably other continents as well. But coelacanths, these are called living fossils because these are creatures that haven't really evolved over the time while everything else has. On the top middle there, you see an example from Ica, Peru of one of the Ica stones. you see a man riding a dinosaur. On the right-hand side, you see a dinosaur carving from the Havasupai Canyon. On the left-hand side, you see a dinosaur carving from a temple in Cambodia. On the bottom left, you see a dinosaur which was painted into a rock in Utah. And on the bottom left, you see statuettes of dinosaurs. These were found in Mexico at Alhambra. A lot of people obviously have questioned the validity of these things, especially the stones and those figures. Well, there was a house that was bought in Mexico because someone anticipated, given how others of these figures were buried, that there were some buried under that house. This house had been built X number of years ago, had been undisturbed. They pulled the floor up of the house, and indeed, these same types of figurines were underneath. Well, the house predated when dinosaurs started becoming popular. So we have not only the evidence of the writers of amazing creatures, but we have the evidence of those who are artists of the past. Very quickly, because we're running out of time, let's talk about Leviathan. Job 40, verses 15 to 20. Job 41. I don't know why I didn't change 40, 15 to 24. This is all of Job 41. He could not be hooked or snared. Well, people can catch crocodiles. He could not be tamed. I think it was Herodotus that said that the Egyptians had tamed crocodiles. Harnessed. He could not be harnessed. He could not be domesticated, merchandised, or hurt by weaponry. Verses 7 and 26 through 29, and a large number of weapons are mentioned there. One who fought him would want to do so no more. Verse 8, most would not dare fight him in the first place, and there's a picturesque description of what they would do when they saw him. Every physical aspect of him was powerful, fierce, intimidating. Verses 12 through 14, 22 through 24, 30, 33, and 34. He was well protected. We don't have time to go into this in detail, but these verses describe the channel of shields that he has. These are the scales. And these scales are so close that you cannot get a weapon between them. Now, this reminds me of Smaug from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, or really The Hobbit. Smaug was only vulnerable because he was missing one scale on his underside. Everywhere else, he was so perfectly armored that he could not be attacked with human weapons. Ultimately, one of the men from Lake Town was able to shoot him in that spot, and he died because of it. So this fellow has scales, like we picture with dragons. He issued fire and smoke, verses 18 through 23 and 31 and 32. And verses 31 and 32 show us that he could do this underwater. So if he's swimming underwater, someone would look at the water, they would be able to tell where he was, and they would think the water hoary, think it white. Because I don't think because of his speed, although that could also be the case, but because he's breathing this fire underwater and those smoke bubbles are rising up to the surface. Well, Leviathan must have been dragon-like. I like going to the source, and this is what Smaug said. Smaug said this about himself. He said, and he's not real, just so you know. He's a dragon in Tolkien's world, but myth is based on reality. Listen to how Smaug described himself. My armor is like tenfold shields. My teeth are swords. My claws spears. The shock of my tail a thunderbolt. My wings a hurricane, and my breath death. Let's say that we were to ask Leviathan of Job 41 to describe himself. Do you think it would have sounded something like that? I believe so. This is one of the most intimidating animals that man could imagine. And we know from the past that there were dragons. We can go to museums and we can see the skeletons of the dragons. We know from some of the things that we've read that dragons did not live too long ago. In fact, co-inhabited with humans. That's how humans were able to draw such good pictures of them. I don't know that you had many comparative anatomists in Mexico during the 1600s or in the Southwest during the 1800s. They were drawing things which they had seen. Well, let's consider the historical demonstration that dragons are real. We're going to look at two ways that we can demonstrate the historicity of dragons. First of all of the dragon legends. I have a mention here of Ishtar Gate in Babylon. Second, the evidence that's provided by the bombardier beetle, that what we attribute to dragons and what Job 41 attributes to dragons could take place. Now, I just grabbed this image off of the internet. This is just an image of some of the dragon traditions around the world. I mainly want you to notice that everywhere in the world there are dragon traditions. One of the foundational ideas that we lay out in our Bible archaeology class is that if you have a counterfeit, there must be an original, and the original is going to have more value. Okay, these are all counterfeits because they are all myths. But myths are based on an original, and the original has more value than the myth does. We don't have time to discuss it, but we could think about the Gilgamesh epic and the description of the ark there with Utnapishtim. The ark is 120 cubits by 120 cubits by 120 cubits, just a big cube and so forth. Well, the description there is a counterfeit, but it implies the existence of an original flood and an original ark, implying the veracity of Moses' account, which has the ring of authenticity to it. Well, here we see counterfeits. You'll notice in the inset pictures, the top of the two inset pictures has a dragon. This dragon is from the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, reconstructed in the Berlin Museum. But the Ishtar Gate had a number of different types of animals, and each of these animals represented some Babylonian god. This was the god representing the god Marduk, represented by the dragon. But that means that in Assyria, you have this cultural understanding of dragons, and we can think about that being true throughout the world. Well, those counterfeits imply an original. But let's focus on the how, the possibility. How can a dinosaur, let's call it a dinosaur, be modified to breathe fire? Okay, simple, very simple. You see that little fellow on the bottom? He's called the bombardier beetle. You will notice that out of his abdomen, he is shooting a liquid. This is a boiling liquid, 212 degrees. Inside his abdomen, he has hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide. These two elements meet when they're being expelled, and there's actually an agent inside him that keeps them from being volatile while they are in his body. I forget what it's called. But that agent is there as soon as these two chemicals are released. This steam is shot out. Now, think about the pictures you've seen of dinosaurs. Big heads. Some of them have real big heads with the huge areas. A lot of benefit from those huge areas. Number one, if they're trying to make a sound, they have this great chamber that can help to cause that sound to reverberate, be heard farther away. Number two, they could be used in courting and things of that nature. Number three, dinosaurs were cold-blooded, which means that they need the sun. And so these basically help to catch the rays of the sun so that they have heat. But those things are going to be heavy. But if you look at a dinosaur skeleton, a lot of these dinosaurs have huge pockets in these large heads. And some of the pockets have been discovered to go to the area around the throat, the head, the mouth. Well, I say head, they're in the head, but around the respiratory area. Now, if this little fella can store different types of gases, is it possible that a dinosaur or dragon could store gases? What do our cows do when they eat a lot of grass? They store methane. In fact, there for a while, we thought the world was going to end because we had too many cows in the world, but fortunately that was only a danger in New York. Maybe in California too, wherever now the cows, they eat the grass, methane is produced. What is methane? Well, it's a flammable gas. It could be that you have one flammable gas. It could be that you have a couple of different gases or maybe even liquids that are stored, but these can be stored in these large areas, these large open spaces. Now, it's possible that the same process that causes the bombardier beetle to be able to expel this gas can take place. You just have two gases that combust when they meet. That's all you need. But let's say you only have methane. Well, you need something that's going to be an ignition agent. Unlike what the evolutionist says, that birds evolved from dinosaurs, they didn't really, but there are some similarities in their makeup. I haven't done too much research into exactly how dinosaur physiology was, but let's say that dinosaurs are similar to birds in that they have gizzards. What is a gizzard? Well, a gizzard, for a bird, birds don't have teeth except the Louisville Cardinal, if you look at that mascot. But birds don't have teeth. But what the birds do is they will take these rocks, swallow these rocks, and they have muscles in their gizzards. The food will go down to where those rocks are, and those muscles cause that food to be ground up by the rocks. Now, are there any rocks that cause sparks? Yeah, there's some of those. When I was a child, Andy and I had a lot of fun finding rocks and just banging them against the concrete to see which one sparked. We think about flint especially. If you have some rocks that spark, you have a gas that's stored. That's a simple way for a fire to be shot out of an animal. In other words, not only do we see that there are traditions throughout the world, but this is a process which would not be difficult at all for an animal to have built into it, especially by a designer like our God. So, our children need to understand, whether it's Job 40 and 41, where they're reading about Behemoth and Leviathan, and God means what he says. Those are real creatures, and God is really the one who gave them their power. But wherever we read in Scripture, we're reading authentic history. Genesis 1 through 11, authentic history. Took place exactly as it is described there. Get into the New Testament, authentic history. Jesus Christ, born of a virgin. Miracles being performed by him to demonstrate the truthfulness of the word that he was preaching and then his disciples after him during the early days of the church, preaching the gospel message with the ability to perform miracles, and the apostles, the ability to pass that ability on to others upon whom they laid their hands. All of those things are real. People will try to attack them, but all of those things are real because we have a God who is behind all of these things. And what a wonderful God he is. Now, the most wonderful thing about God is not only is he interested in, concerned with, and responsible for his physical creation, he's interested in his spiritual creation. He's interested in you, and he's interested in me as beings who are created in his image. And his desire is that we be united with him and that we spend an eternity with him. That unity is only possible when we will make up this gap, if you will, that was created when we committed our first sins. Because Isaiah 59 speaks of sin being what separates us from our God, and we read in Romans 3 that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. How do we get reconciled? That takes place as we hear his word and believe it, as we repent of our sins that separated us, as we confess that Christ is the Son of God, as we're baptized to have those sins be washed away, and as we live faithfully. If God's physical world is so ruled by order and so greatly his concern, how much more can we expect the spiritual elements to be ruled with order? Order regarding how someone is saved, order regarding the Lord's church, order regarding worship, order regarding how we live our daily lives, and how much more God's concern for his creation. This evening, if you're not a child of God, you have the opportunity to serve the Creator of all. If you need to respond tonight, won't you do so as together we stand and sing?